What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Live. First off, apologies for last Thursday's post game. We had some last minute stuff come up. If you've been following this channel, we don't normally do that. So, we'll try to not do that in the future. But sometimes, life can just
Mm.
kind of come at you. But honestly, Ethan, it was a blessing in disguise because no Victor Wembanyama in that game, and also the Spurs kind of got blown out in that one. So really, there probably wasn't much to recap anyway, other than us being like, "Well, this feels like last season." So we kind of dodged a bullet there. Probably wasn't the worst game to miss recapping.
I was able to keep like one eye on the screen, and then was able to watch kind of the highlights and some breakdown later. And you're right, Jude. It just feels like a last year game. Just one of the worst starts of the year so far in the first two quarters, and a little bit of a third quarter run, and then immediately gave it up again in the fourth quarter. But I think this one, in the way that it wasn't like last year. Last year we would have shot ourselves in the foot. In this game, we just couldn't hit any threes. That was really it. Like our offense just could not get going. We were 18% on the night, and then those first two quarters, like we couldn't throw like a rock in the ocean if we were standing on
Yeah.
a boat type thing.
And you're talking about the Chicago game, just to clarify there, right?
I'm talking about the Suns game.
Oh, see, I was talking about the Chicago game
Oh, look at
because we
us!
had to cancel that one
Look at
last week
us!
early. It's okay. It's
My
okay.
fault.
We're gonna get into the Suns game is what we're talking about first.
Right.
So you're on the right
I
track
jumped. I
there.
jumped the gun, Jude. I jumped the gun.
It's okay. But yeah, bottom line is that Chicago Bulls game last week would not have been the most thrilling post game, Ethan. I'd be surprised if honestly we would have got to 20 minutes with that one.
You're probably right. Yes. Now that I'm remembering the correct game, you are correct, Jude.
But with that being said, the first game that we are going to recap tonight is the Phoenix Suns versus the San Antonio Spurs with an NBA Cup quarterfinal trip on the line. We're going to recap all the games that we've missed since the last time that we talked to you guys. I see we also got Mace in the comments here, so we'll go ahead and see what he's saying before we dive into all of this. Mace says, "What's up, fellas? Thoughts on the idea that we're back in tanking mode because Atlanta is looking competitive." And he also said, "You'd both be right on that game too. LOL."
Oh crap! Sorry, cat just scared the crap out of me.
Another appearance. Was that Winky?
That's his Winky. Yes,
He wants to be on the show.
he's Spurs cat. We have Spurs dog last year with my cousin's dog. Now we have Spurs cat in my apartment. But I don't know if tanking is really what we're doing, Jude. I feel like it's just like an injury bug constantly plaguing us in different ways, and it's throwing off chemistry and throwing off, cohesion.
I would lean with that too. Not to always agree with everything that you said, but I would say I would agree that we're not tanking in the sense that we have the past 2 years.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, Mace, I get your logic there with Atlanta looking a little bit competitive because obviously that pick that is going to be ours, is not in that top 5 range as it seemed like it was going to be in the beginning of the season. So I do understand what you're getting at there, but I think the bigger reason for our rough losses was one, we basically had the same record as the Suns anyway. And if we're being honest, the Suns are just more experienced and have more proven talent on that roster as of
Right.
right now. And we'll get into that here in a second. As you can see, an 11-point loss here. But the other two games that we lost this past week, the Kings and the Bulls, I really think, again, like I said at the beginning of this episode, those felt like last year games, just in the sense that there was no Victor. And that's kind of how the team looked last year when Victor wasn't on the floor. It was, kind of just got blown out in both of those games. There's really not too much to break down in the
Mhm.
Kings and Bulls games, unfortunately, later in the week.
You realize that even when Victor's playing poorly, it's better to have him on the court than not because he's just the center point of literally everything that we do on both sides of the ball.
And, when we go back to some of our early season wins where we were gaining some confidence without Victor, like you go back to that Oklahoma City Thunder win, like that's the one that pops into my mind first. And it's like, okay, well, how are we beating the Thunder without Victor? And then we're looking like this. Well,
Mhm.
also in that game, the Thunder had literally no big. They were playing Jalen Williams at the center position, essentially.
True.
So, there's that context. And I will say, of course, obviously, having Chris Paul and having Harrison Barnes is going to lead to more wins in those situations. But at the end of the day, Ethan, not to sit here and toot our own horn, it's only 24 games into the season, but we kind of expected the Spurs to be a fringe play-in games or play-in team, which is where they're at in the standings right now at around 12-12. But the thing about fringe play-in teams is they're inconsistent. So you have some wins without Victor, and then you have some performances like we saw last week. But also, like you said, the injury bug overall, Trey out again.
Mhm.
There's just a lot of different rotations and lineups going on. That's not to say that there aren't things that could have been better executed on. That's not to say that they weren't bad performances overall. But at the same time, that is key context.
It doesn't help. I feel like there's a trend, or is it causation versus correlation? Harrison Barnes plays well, we win. Harrison Barnes plays poorly, we lose. And that's not even playing poorly. Harrison Barnes doesn't score, we lose. Because when he was on that stretch, we were winning every game. And then these 3 games that we lost in a row, I don't think he broke 10 points. And then against the Pelicans, we won. And what did he have? 16 and plus 20 in the plus minus. So Harrison Barnes is the key, dude.
Well, that is a perfect segue into this first game that we're going to recap on the screen right now. Last week's loss to the Phoenix Suns with a trip to the quarterfinals on the line. Harrison Barnes, 1 for 8, 0 for 3 in that game, Ethan, to your point. So got to mention that. And really just overall, other than Devin, offensively, I mean, I guess you could maybe say the same thing for Jeremy, but for the most part, really other than Devin, it was a rough shooting night for the rest of the team.
And there was a little bit of a run in that third quarter that we have to mention. Shout out CP3, Victor Wembanyama, a little bit of Devin Vassell, like you had just talked about, but he was pretty consistent the entire game. But other than that quick, I don't know, 3 4 minute run, it was pretty one sided in favor of Phoenix, and they didn't even have Kevin Durant for the second half, but they were still able to pull it out with an 11-point win.
Yeah, and as you mentioned that, Ethan, the only quarter that the Spurs won was the third quarter,
Hmm.
32-23. Obviously, this was basically a week ago at this point, so a little bit of the memory
Hmm.
that I have from watching this game is faded. But honestly, the main takeaway that I have from this Spurs Suns game, it's kind of like you talked about earlier. Even when I thought you were talking about the Chicago game, we weren't able to really hit our shots. I mean, 8 for 44 from three on
Yeah.
the night, 35 for 100. Overall, at least we were able to get to the line and shoot semi decently well there. But it was hard to get that lid off the basket. 1 for 9 for Wemby overall, 6 for 18 overall for him, 5 for 14 from Stephon Castle, 1 for 5 from 3 from them. Both of those guys were able to, well, more Castle was able to get to the line, and Victor obviously was still able to have impact with 13 boards, 7 assists, with a block and a steal as well.
Hmm.
But again, really the only consistent offense that we were able to get was from Devin Vassell. And even with that, because of the way that we played defensively, and like you said, some of this might have to do with KD being out for a good portion of the game. Um, but at the same time, it just felt like we were always like 10 points behind them.
Right.
That was my main takeaway that I remember from this game. Maybe we went on a little run and cut it to 8 or 6, and then the Suns would respond. So it was always within reach, but the Suns were always in control of this game. And again, that just ties back into the way that we shot. As well as you got to give Coach Bud some credit. That's another thing that I forgot about. I mean, I remember that Coach Bud is the coach, but it's like, again, you turn on the game and it's like, oh,
Hmm.
right, that's right. This is Coach Bud scheming against us. As
Yeah.
much as it's Mitch Johnson, he knows the Spurs way. That's somebody who can come up with a game plan against Victor and the Spurs offense. And, they executed it to perfection. And as much as it wasn't, like we kind of said, the Spurs were able to keep it within reach, the Suns never really felt out of control.
Yeah. We praised Mitch Johnson a lot, and I still continue to just have those opinions. But this is one of those games where I would have liked to have seen him throw Bassie or Mamu in there because Zach was just abysmal, and we needed some kind of energy spark. And we had it in that third quarter, but otherwise, it was pretty bland offensively. I'm not saying that they would turn things around, but Mamu has had streaks of, hitting 3 or 4 threes in a row, and Sandro can get a couple putback dunks, a couple crazy blocks, and kind of propel us. And maybe even give Malachi Branham a shot because Harrison Barnes had 2 points. Julian was 1 for 8 from three. Stephon was 1 for 6. Like at some point, we got to shake it up a little bit when our shots aren't falling, and just see if
Mhm.
somebody that's riding the pine can give us what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. There's really not too much else to break down in this game. Devin Booker on the other end was the leading
Yeah,
scorer for the Suns. Um, but again, just were not able to execute, didn't shoot well. Honestly, looking at the box score, it's kind of we're kind of lucky that we were able to just stay in the game in general.
for sure. And I think a lot of that had to do with KD not playing the second half.
Absolutely. So that was a tough one, and unfortunately, we've got some more tough ones to break down after that. This was the start of a 3-game losing streak for the Spurs after it was naturally right after they got above 500. We had to come back down to earth a little bit, and that leads us into this Bulls game that, again, we were going to do a post game for, but unfortunately, we had some stuff come up late. And Ethan, the story is kind of the same. We were able to win the third quarter, 40-35. Except but just all the other quarters were more in Chicago's favor, especially that first quarter with the 36-22 start. I mean, 40 points basically from Nikola Vucevic on 16 for 22 shooting, had 8 boards, 5 assists as well. Ayo Dosunmu went crazy in
Mhm.
this game. I don't know if this is his first career triple-double, but it's definitely, one of the probably one on single digits that he has in his career. I'm pretty sure that's not outrageous to say Ayo Dosunmu doesn't have double-digit triple-doubles, unless I'm just totally ignorant.
Mhm.
But 27, 10, 11, 3 steals, 3 for 3 from 3, 6 for 6 from the free throw line, 9 for 13 overall. THT, Matas Buzelis, and Dalen Terry also contributing all off the bench for the Bulls in this one. Meanwhile, the Spurs' only 20-point plus scorer was Keldon Johnson. Did get 17 from Devin Vassell, but on 6 for 15, and 1 for 5 shooting overall. So unfortunately, an inefficient night for him. But the context is he kind of just carried us 2 nights prior against the Suns. And even Keldon scoring, I don't want to take away from what Keldon did in this game, but again, this is why I use the example of how this kind of feels like a last year game or even a 2022 game, if we want to be real. That Keldon was able to just take a lot of these shots. A lot of that was in the second half as well. But really, the Bulls were kind of blowing us out the entirety of the time in this one. And I think that more has to do, yes, you could point to Stephon Castle shooting and Victor being out, but I think mainly that has to do with what they did offensively with Vucevic and Dosunmu.
Yeah, you can't predict Io DeSumo going crazy like he did. Vucevic, we should have known was going to happen because we just didn't have Wemby, and we decided to start Jeremy at the center, which he did his absolute best. He had 16 and 14. Like I don't want to disrespect him, but he's only 6'8", 6'9". Vucevic is a classic back to the basket center, and he feasted on him, and he also hit 2 threes. So that was bound to happen. We were out rebounded. It wasn't crazy. It was 50-41. We actually had less turnovers, but then we shot just completely abysmally. And again, a lot of that has to do with Victor not being there as that cornerstone. We looked a little lost offensively. That's why Keldon had to do what he did, like you spoke about. I liked what I saw from KJ and Devin off the bench as far as their chemistry together, attacking, trying to get some mojo from the rest of the guys. But this was lost early when they jumped out 36-22.
Yeah, especially with no Victor, and like you said, just straight up the size disadvantage. You got to give Jeremy credit for having 14 boards, but also that's kind of nature of circumstance
Yeah.
to an extent. Was definitely fighting out there. He did not have a bad game in this game. But when you have that size, not just the height disadvantage, like you mentioned, but also the weight disadvantage too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a big ask there for Jeremy,
I would have preferred Bassie honestly get the start in this situation. I know
or
that
at
would
least
be
Zach. Like,
yeah, I mean, that would probably be more likely is that Zach would get the
right.
nod. I understand why they did it. Maybe they just wanted to test it out, let him get back into that starting rotation, play with CP3, maybe spark some offense with the small ball movement. That wasn't working.
Yeah.
I would have gone to Bassie really quickly.
Yeah, I definitely get where your logic is coming from. And when I brought up the Zach point, it was basically to what you said in response. Like that would probably be more likely because that's just kind of been what I guess the pecking order, if you
A
will, be
trend,
at
yeah.
center all year. But honestly, if we're just going straight matchup wise, take all that context out. I'm with you. I'd rather start Charles, bring Zach off the bench. I think that's just a better matchup for a guy like Vooch. That's not to say Vooch still maybe wouldn't, get above 20 points in that circumstance, but it wouldn't be 40.
Correct.
And Cowboy Tanaka, he was in some of our community post comments asking about this specifically, playing Jeremy at center. He
Mm.
says, "What was all that about? 32 minutes from Jeremy on second after an injury and a lot of rust and playing center." Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna write it off, Jude, as just an attempt to beat size with a small ball lineup. That's what I'm gonna write it off as, and it didn't work because we shot so poorly from three. Had we went 40% from three, maybe this is a completely different outcome.
Yeah, and that's basically what the Thunder were having to do. I know I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier whenever they had to deal with Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein's injury, or injuries. So that's basically what they were able to do. And when they were winning games, it was because they were shooting the lights out of the ball. So when you try to go that route and you shoot poorly, that's a recipe for a blowout, unfortunately, especially when you have Io and Nicola having the games that they did. But just to hit on Cowboys' point here a little bit as well. Another thing that I've kind of noticed in the past couple games is I think they were kind of tinkering, and I think this was because of the injuries, like with a Jeremy at center backup rotation. Remember when we talked about that last week where you
Mhm.
put him next to Mamu? I've seen that lineup out there. Mamu played in this game. I don't remember if it was this game exactly. I think it was the Kings game that we'll get into next. Um, but regardless, I think they were kind of trying to see how that would look. That
Mhm.
could be something else. Like, again, I don't know that for sure, but that would be another thing that I could say maybe they were trying to do. But the bottom line is, regardless, is that I don't think either worked. And with Charles Bassey's performance last night against the New Orleans Pelicans, which we'll finish off all the recaps with, I think it only reinforces, the point that we should not do that more.
Yeah, I would only do it on matchup advantages, Jude. Like I really don't like that personally when we're going up against a 7-footer, even if
Yeah,
it's not Vucevic. Let's
right,
say it's I don't make up a name, Bol. Like
right. Or
I'm
Zubac.
Zubats, like any big that's like actually large. I don't like trying to combat that because I don't think we're a good enough 3-point shooting team for that to work on a consistent basis.
Here's how I'll put it. I mean, I completely agree. I'm cool with maybe trying this, like putting Jeremy at center against Trace Jackson Davis.
Yes.
And even then, Trace Jackson Davis is still a little bit bigger than Jeremy Sohan, but like I'm
Draymond.
cool. I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
But again, when we're going up against Vucevic or Zubox or a Hartenstein, for example, that's not the route I want to go.
Agreed.
But that's about all we got to say about this Bulls game. This next recap that we get into here will not be much longer than the one that we just had, but nonetheless, we are going to go through it. This was the Sacramento Kings coming back for revenge in San Antonio, beating us 140-113. We did not win the third quarter in this one, Ethan. We were able to tie the first quarter, and basically every other quarter than that, the Sacramento Kings won by at least 5 points or more. In the second and the fourth quarter, they won by 10 points or more. 22 points from Sabonis, 23 points from DeMar DeRozan, 22 points from De'Aaron Fox, 22 points from Malik Monk, 17 points from Keegan Murray. Everybody in the starting lineup shot at least, close to 50%. Well, now that I think about it, actually, De'Aaron Fox 9 for 17. That is above 50%. I was doing some math wrong there. So everybody in their starting lineup above 50% on top of 16 from Kevin Kurter off the bench, 6 for 7, 4 for 4. This is how the Kings want to play when they're at their best, Ethan.
Yeah, this is exactly how they thought they would play when they brought all these players to this team. It hasn't worked out for them so far this season, but it worked out against us for sure. To me, this is just a defensive liability game. Like, I know we don't have Victor, he's our anchor, but you have to have a little bit more intensity, a little more physicality. You got to pressure the ball, and you just can't allow 5 different guys to basically do whatever they want offensively. And it just looked effortless, especially in that second quarter. Like they were really just walking into shots, whether it be DeMar in the mid range, couple pump fakes, pull up, or De'Aaron Fox taking guys off the dribble with a pick and roll with Domantas Sabonis. Everything just looked so clean and crisp. And on the other end, we just couldn't knock down a shot unless your name was Julian Champagny, where you had 30 points on 6 of 12 from three, a career high night for him. Otherwise, the team was pretty mediocre to subpar.
Yeah, man, I watched this one and it just was a blur the entire time.
Yeah.
It was just like, wow, we're just getting totally blown out. The
Mhm.
ball movement for Sacramento was, great for them. That's why they had so much point distribution in their starting lineup. And when you have Herter coming in and going 4 for 4, 6 for 7 overall on top of that, again,
Mhm.
I mean, that's the perfect recipe. Like this box score that we pulled up earlier, this is like total King's paradise of how they want
Mhm.
to play. Maybe you'd like to get some other points from some other guys on the bench. Keon Ellis maybe sometimes can have a bigger game, but even with Keon Ellis tonight, and look at this plus 32, just a random. So obviously he had 4 steals. So
Mhm.
again, contributions everywhere, and even Dougie McBuckets came in and hit a 3 on us.
Yeah, I mean, they just couldn't miss. Some nights you just have it. I don't know if this is just Sacramento executing to perfection, or if it's more so Spurs having some of the worst defense I've ever seen. Either way, a lot of things that we have to clean up.
Think probably, it might even be a combination of both
It,
in
it
this one.
probably is, and it doesn't help. Like Mace saying in the comments that Sacramento shot 47% from three. That's also probably just they were hot.
Yeah. There's going to be games like this from every team in the league at some point. It's not an excuse because when you have back-to-back performances like
Mm-hmm.
this, at this point, I think even these guys would tell us that it's inexcusable
Mm-hmm.
for where the team's at now. Um, but shout out to Champagny for getting 30, and I will say that Sohan at least had a decent box score game as well. And the last thing that I'll say, only not now Zach. Wait, no, Zach got hurt last night.
This
Um,
was when he flicked
yeah.
someone off, right?
Yeah, this was when he got ejected with only 9 minutes left, and I still haven't watched that. I got the alert. I need to go check that
It's
out.
pretty funny.
I just I figured it would be, but got caught up with the game last night, was trying to focus on that. But 26 minutes from Charles Bassey in this one. Also got to see 17 from Mamu. But regardless, just a total beatdown in this one.
This is exactly what I want to see from Zach. Actually, I'm going to grade this an A plus. Uh, I don't necessarily want him to play all that much, but I do want him to get technicals and at least attempt to rile the team up. I love it when he fights people, even if he's in the wrong. It's just fun for me. So let's keep this energy, Zach. Let's try and get out of the next game too.
Before I for remembered that when you mentioned that, I was going to say, well, Zach only played 9 minutes, so as you that was probably because of how the defensive performance went,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe I mean that probably is still true for the 9 minutes that he played, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the bigger takeaway is what you said. And Mace says Zach Collins crashing out, the laughing faces. I definitely got to check that out for sure. Um, and Alejandro Morales, help me out here, Ethan. Is this from the last game? He says you can say Penny went ludicrous because the hair twins. Do you get this?
Penny.
I'm thinking Penny Hardaway,
Yeah,
but
it's the only penny I can think of. But
oh, Champagny.
Penny.
Champagny, duh. Okay,
Mm.
true. Now I get it. Now I get it. I feel that. I like that. Sorry for not getting that. I
Yeah,
should
it
have
took me a
gotten that.
second too. He does look like Ludacris. That's kind of crazy. I never noticed that before.
Cowboy Tanaka says, I don't agree. I think that should be his last highlight as a Spur. That's what he says about Zach Collins. I'm sure we've had a lot of Spurs fans that feel that way. And here's what I will tell you. The next game, you got to see a good bit of Charles Bassey, which is
Mhm.
who a lot of you guys are clamoring for. So let's move on to that one, Ethan. Let's talk about the bounce back win last night to end the 3-game losing streak. Chris Paul also moved up to second all time in assists, a super cool moment to have in San Antonio. I was happy to be there when
Mhm.
he got to third all time assists. So super cool to see that. But what was even more super cool was the Spurs finding a way to win. They almost choked. They gave up a 13-0 run in crunch time, Ethan. But Wemby hit a clutch 3. They found a way to pull it out. And against a 5-20 team like the Pelicans, as much as they have got some guys back after injury, specifically our old friend DeJounte Murray, this was much needed, not just in the standings, but also for the team.
Yeah, this was honestly not a great game statistically. We had more turnovers. We had more rebounds. That's basically the only
Yeah.
category that we won was rebounding. We shot worse, other than at the free throw line. We got to the free throw line 10 times more often, so that tells me we were being more aggressive. Um, Side note, Sean Elliott's comment about we got to get the Pelicans out of this arena is hilarious because we had so many injuries occur during this game. Stefan with his shoulder, somebody else had a hand. Victor went out with his back. Zach had a back injury too. Like
Mhm.
I think Keldon had a non-contact
Yes.
calf injury. I'm not sure what that is or if it's been released. Anyway, having Victor Wembanyama on the court is the key, and Harrison Barnes shooting efficiently. Because we actually were down when Victor went out with his injury. When
Uh-huh.
he came back, I think we went on a 14-2 run that kind of propelled us back into this game. I think that probably had something to do with the 43-28 second quarter that I'm seeing in favor for the Spurs. And somehow, like you said, by the nick of our chin, we were able to scrape this out as a victory. But a lot of it is due to Charles Bassey coming in off the bench after Zach went down with 16 points, 11 rebounds, 4 blocks. He was the catalyst to that second unit that propelled us forward. Big words there, and gave us the energy that we needed when Victor went out. And then obviously when Victor came back in, he was able to carry us to a victory.
Yeah, man. I missed the third quarter of this one. I just had something come up, but I was able to catch the rest of the game. Um, and really the thing that sticks out to me is that finish. I
Mhm.
know that it was ugly and we really
Big
probably
shot.
should have won this game by double digits or close to it, arguably. But the fact that we were able to fend it off and Victor hit that clutch three. We also got to mention earlier in the game, he has that block. We finally got to see a one-legged three after that. But like you said, this wasn't the prettiest game overall. Um, but I think it was a game that we needed in order to kind of get out of the rut that we were in. Obviously, Victor coming back is a huge part of that, but 22 points for Stefan on efficient shooting as well, 5 and 4 with a
Mhm.
steal, 2 for 5 from three, 8 for 15 overall. Champagny, a solid game as well. I know not the greatest 3-point shooting night, but this is a solid Champagny game in my opinion. And like you said about Harrison Barnes, only 4 for 6, got to the line 4 times. If I'm doing my math right, 5 for 6 from the line, 3 for 5 from three with 16 points in this one. Those last two games we mentioned, Ethan, I think you're really onto something there because those last two games, Harrison Barnes shot inefficient and had less than double digit points. Here we are again in the first game since our last win. And here he is, 16 points on efficient shooting. Um, but Charles Bassey, man, 4 blocks. Wemby had 3 blocks, 16 and 11. He was coming in getting dunks, getting easy baskets, and that was huge because we really didn't shoot all that well this game.
Mhm.
We went 12 for 39, 30% overall from three. The only person who really shot well from three for themselves was Harrison Barnes. Um,
Mhm.
so again, scoring inside when our outside shot wasn't falling was huge, and obviously we know that's where Chuck gets his points. And went 4 for 7 from the line as well.
It's crazy that he's the highest scoring guy off the bench because our bench really wasn't great outside of him. Devin had a bad game, 3 of 11 shooting. Keldon didn't play great, only 2 for 5, missed both threes that he took. Jeremy played well overall, but still only 7 points. So we needed to find those points somewhere. Charles Bassey stepped up, and I know you gave Stefan Castle a shout out, but he really needs a big shout out in this game too.
Yeah,
I know he was -8. Don't believe that because he 22 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. Defensively, still great, and he had that crazy behind the back pass to Victor Wembanyama for the dunk and fast break scenario. It's always a pleasure watching Area 51 play well together.
and I'm so glad you mentioned that. I brought up Go Spurs Go Nation's comment a little bit a while ago saying the Bassey double double in the Area 51 showed
Right.
up in the clutch. And I think this is like the second game this year. Obviously, you want to mention Harrison and Charles with their contributions, and even Champagny a little bit to an extent. But this is like the second game this year where Stefan and Wemby have
Mhm.
really carried us to a win when the rest of the team, isn't playing their best. Like 3 for 11, 0 for 4 in this game from Devin Vassell. Still found some ways to stay involved with 4 assists, with the block as well. But on nights like that, this is the type of stuff that you got to have happen. So the fact that we're continuing to see this as the season goes on, it really is. I mean, obviously, you don't want to take away from Victor, but this game really shines a light on Stefan Castle and what he can do for this team.
a quiet 22-5-4, Jude, as well. Like, I didn't think he
Me
had that
either.
stat line until I looked after the game.
Yeah, completely agree there. I want to get to some other comments we got down here. Alejandro Morales says, hot take, all caps. Bassey's blocks are more emphatic than Wemby.
No,
It's
you're right.
crazy. I can't disagree either, especially last night. But dude, he swats. I forget which one it was. He like kind of came in late, and just swatted
Mhm,
it back. I mean, you see the strength on Charles when he's fighting for the boards. You can
mhm.
see it in his blocks too, man.
For sure. I love that he brings energy every single time he plays because half the time he doesn't even get in the game. But when he does, he always tries to take advantage of it. Even if statistically he doesn't play as well as he did last night, you can bet that he's going to play hard, get rebounds, and block a couple crazy shots.
All of that just in 18 minutes as well. This once
Mhm,
again just kind of furthers that conversation that really we've been having since training camp and even like last year, if we want to go real in the weeds of this Zach versus Charles conversation off the bench. And one other thing I want to say again, I know it's just one game, but this ties into Brian Wright, man. Julian Champagny and Charles
mhm,
Bassey on the contracts that they are, finding them from the G League, originally
mhm.
both two-way guys. You got to give him some credit there because both of these guys played in the teal jerseys 2 years ago, and we're seeing their development here in 2024.
Shout out to Philadelphia 76ers developmental team. They got him ready for us.
The blue coats,
The Blue
baby.
Coats, baby.
Them and Mac McClung.
Oh, man.
Shout out. Y'all farmed for us. We appreciate it.
Big time.
Okay, last note on this game. Alejandro Morales says, it's those Cajun witches in NOLA.
Mm,
Wemby with the scare, then Zach out, then a Castle shoulder scare. And I had the same thought about Wemby, especially because he was coming off, the back day-to-day injury where he had been out in the Kings and the Bulls game. So I was honestly scared he wasn't going to come back. Thank the Lord he did. But as someone with a grandmother from New Orleans, the Cajun voodoo is real. Let me
mm.
just say that. And I felt it too, Alejandro. You're right on the money. As someone with part of my heart there, you're right, man. It's crazy. Anyways,
You gotta make some calls, Jude. Make sure we're not injured next time we play the
look,
Pelicans, please.
I'm gonna call what's her name? There's like the like most famous witch doctor in New Orleans. Anyways, I think
Mhm.
it's like Marie Laveau or something like that. Laveau is definitely the last name. I might be thinking of Marie Antoinette in the first part. I don't even know if she's a witch doctor, but regardless. The point is, I'm gonna burn some incense. I'm gonna burn some sage next time. I'm gonna try to
Heck yeah.
counter these voodoo demons the next time we play them, because we got to go play them there next time.
Yeah,
It's gonna be
we need it.
worse.
We need it.
I will definitely I will call my Cajun family and we will do everything we can to counter the spirits. Okay. And here's the last one from Alejandro. Bassey is our 2022 15 Patty Mills with
Mm.
that energy. I see what he's getting at. He
Mhm.
brings in the juice as a role guy for sure.
Bring back Patty. Save him.
You know, next season at one point I'm not mad at bringing Patty back as the third string. I'd love it.
Me too.
All righty. Well, that will wrap up all of our recaps, Ethan. But we do have one more game to go over that I am going to just leave on the screen share here just to see what the injury report is looking like. But only one game this week because the San Antonio Spurs, or excuse me, the National Basketball Association is kind of on an off week this week, other than those teams playing in the NBA Cup quarterfinals, which will be Tuesday, Wednesday. So no games then. I believe if there's games Thursday, the Spurs don't play on Thursday, so they'll be back Friday. But that's kind of why there's a little bit of an elongated break.
Mm.
And you'll kind of see the same thing next week as well. We won't play until Thursday. We have another game in there after this one. I'm pretty sure. Maybe it's another Sunday game. And that's because of the NBA Cup finals, which will be next Tuesday. The semifinals are this Saturday. So if you're
Mhm.
wondering why, like there's a little bit of, some space between some of these games coming up, it's because of the in-season tournament. And as you can see up here, Ethan, the only person who is listed as out for sure is going to be Trey Jones, who's basically out until after Christmas with the separated shoulder. So potential for Keldon Johnson and Zach Collins to come back. Looking at the injury report for the Blazers, Robert Williams may be back for them in this game, as well as Duop Reith, so they may get some bigs back as well. I haven't seen who, to be honest, this is the first time ever seeing Taze Moore. I don't know if it's Taz. I don't know how to say it. He probably doesn't play that much anyway.
So when you start doing auto-generated draft classes in 2K.
Exactly. Matisse Thybulle and Donovan Clingan
We
are
know
going to
them.
be out. Are going to be out of this game. But I think if old boy Time Lord, if y'all know who that is, that's Robert Williams. If y'all don't know that reference, if he's back, I think that will be significant with Klingan's absence still.
Right. Definitely a game where we're going to utilize Bassey, especially if Zach Collins is unhealthy. Because not Donovan Clingan, but Robert Williams is a very physical presence, kind of like Bassey. Yeah, I think Bassey's maybe a little bit taller, but as
Yes.
far as rolling centers that can dunk, block shots, get rebounds, that's the same mold. I'm going to predict, Jude, a Spurs win in this one. Given that we have Victor coming off of a win like we did, we're going to have a long rest between these games for everybody to get back and healthy. I just think that all signs point to a Spurs win. And we've struggled on the road, yes, but the Blazers are only 5-6 at home. And to be quite frank, even healthy, I would say the Spurs are a better team than the Trailblazers are as currently constructed. And Chris Paul is notorious for torching young guards. And I'm not saying Scoot Henderson, Shaden Sharp are bad defenders, but Chris Paul is just a crafty guy. He'll probably get in their head. And I'm gonna go out on a ledge and say that he's gonna get 10 plus assists in this game.
I'll put it to you this way, Ethan. Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp are both younger than us. So as much as they have very talented, bright futures, they're still at the age where a guy like Chris Paul can take advantage of some things experience-wise for sure. I feel bad because the last time we came on here, we felt like we were going to get that win against the Suns. And then we went on a 3-game losing streak. But I think with the rest, as Cowboy Tanaka mentioned a little bit earlier, as well as here's the other thing. Well, let me see where the Bulls are at record-wise, actually. Y'all just take a journey with me here. Let me get to the NBA standings.
10-15.
Okay, they're 10-15. I was going to say, is the Suns, the Kings, and the Bulls, all those teams that we lost to, are still at a different level record-wise than the Blazers. You could say that the Bulls are a little bit closer to them, but even then, they're still at least fringe play-in the East.
Yeah.
Where the Trailblazers on the other end are probably going to be looking on the outside in. So I think the Spurs have shown this year with their wins against, yes, they did lose to the Jazz once, but if you look at the bottom of the West here, their wins against the Pelicans and 2 wins against the Jazz. And I believe, didn't we play Portland earlier this year?
Did, and we won.
And we won that game 118-105. So, they'll definitely be looking to get back, but I think I don't want to, knock on wood. Our guy Matt Wilson was in here last time, and he was like, I try to remind myself that this is a very young team and it's early in the season. But 24 games in, I'm going to say that I think we can kind of handle these bottom 3 teams in the West for the most part. Like you said, Ethan, I think we can say, even after these past 2 seasons, it feels weird to say it about almost any team. The Spurs are just better than the Blazers.
I agree with you. Hold up for like a minute and a half.
Yes.
I got to pee so bad.
You're good. You're good.
Be right back.
Go for
I'll
it.
make sure to mute myself.
Go for it. So it is just going to be me with you guys for this one here. This looks a little weird, so I'm going to go ahead and change that to where I'm down in the corner here. But let's go ahead and see who else the Spurs are playing. We'll go ahead and get Ethan's thoughts on it before he comes back. So obviously, we talked about that Portland game. I thought there was a game kind of in between that next Atlanta game. Like we said, we have another lull next week because of the NBA Cup. And we will go play the Minnesota Timberwolves. We actually do have a win against them earlier this season. Look at that. That is the only time that we've played them. So they're going to be coming back for revenge. But even with that being said, still have around the same record as us. They're around the same area in the standings, but let's go ahead and click on this Spurs game here to see if there's any injury report stuff that we can see. Well, no, I just clicked on the Spurs. Y'all are seeing me click around here. Apologies for that. But I was trying to get to exactly the game. I gotta click on the time. That's the way we want to do it. There we go. So here On December 13th, Joe Ingles and Rob Dillingham, technically a Spurs draft pick, even though we obviously traded him, will be back probably by this game unless there's other injuries because they're a game time decision on the 13th. So even if they don't play that game, I would expect them to be back for this game on the 15th. This is a 6 o'clock start, kind of just like the Sunday night game that we had last time, Ethan. I was talking about the old Timberwolves game that we have coming up on Sunday, since we probably will not be back until then. And I was seeing, it looks like Rob Dillingham and Joe Ingles are on the injury report here, but that's for the 13th. So probably both of those guys will be back against the Timberwolves next Sunday. And we beat them in the first matchup, and we kind of have around the same record. So I think they're really going to be coming for a bounce back win in this one, especially Anthony Edwards.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I have a feeling that he's going to take it personally, like the man that somebody compare him to, and come out for blood against the Spurs.
Yeah, and you could even say the same thing for old boy Rob Dillingham. I mentioned him as like technical Spurs draft pick there, but he probably had some extra motivation to score on us as well in this one. So I'll leave you with this, Ethan. I think we're going to win that Portland game. I'm going to say we do end up losing this one. If we didn't win the first game, I might be a little bit more optimistic about it. But because we won the first game, I really think that like you said, Anthony Edwards is going to be coming back for blood in this one.
I'm going to agree with that, but just add a little bit more fun
Okay.
to these predictions. I'm going to say Blake Wesley gets minutes off the bench and locks up Rob
My
Dillingham.
goodness.
That's my prediction.
Okay. I hope it comes true. I'll say that.
Plus 26 in the box score for Blake Wesley.
I'm going to hammer the over 10 points for Rob Dillingham. No. As much as mad respect to Blake, he's a really good, solid perimeter defender. But I've been seeing some Rob Dillingham stuff, but we don't need to sit here forever.
It's wrapped. It's locked up. It's
on that. I love it. Anyways, Ethan, one final thing that I kind of wanted to talk about that I sent you in a text today that's just kind of, a little bit different than the monotonous, recapping games and previewing them. What are your thoughts on Devin Vassell? Now that we've got, a decent amount of games sample size with him, obviously a lot of this is coming back from injury, and there's been, kind of like the theme with Keldon last year, where it was like he was just through so much turmoil of different rotations, injuries, stuff like that. Obviously, we've still seen multiple. I think we've seen at least 3 20-plus point games for Devin where he just looks super efficient. But you also have the 3 for 11 games that we went over this past week with the games that we missed. Just what are your thoughts on what you've seen from Devin so far this year? I guess what I was trying to set up there is I understand there's some context to everything, like he's not back in the starting lineup yet. Mm-hmm. But what have you seen so far from Devin? What are some things that you'd like or that you like? And then what are some things that maybe you'd like to see improve?
I'd give Devin a B- thus far. I know, like you said, there's a lot of context here, and I don't have the stats in front of me to back any of these takes up. This is simply eye test. I feel like he hasn't been as explosive offensively as I had expected him to be. Mm-hmm. Again, maybe that'll be fixed when he starts playing full-time next to Victor and CP3. But I wish he was just more aggressive, Jude. I think we ended last year by saying he needs to take the ball aggressively to the basket more often instead of settling for outside jumpers. And I still think he's kind of settling for some really difficult shots in the mid-range. I know he's capable of that. I don't want him to stop taking that. I would just like to see a little more variety in the shots that he does take. And I think he can boost that points per game number up because, again, he hasn't been bad. And I've really enjoyed watching him come back. And maybe all of these things will be fixed when he starts playing with the right starting lineup. But that, and I'm being nitpicky here, but I really want him to be more aggressive taking the ball to the basket.
I think that's very fair. One thing we can say, in the 9 games he's played, still shooting plus 40% from the field as well as from 3, 16 points overall, basically 3 assists and 2 boards. And we know that he can be as I mentioned last year, he can be a 25-5 guy. And when I say that, I don't mean 25 points. I mean 20 points, 5 boards, 5 assists. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, with the new cast of characters that are in, you could maybe argue that maybe that's a little bit more for Stefan, because we've seen a lot of that from him as well. And you maybe want Devin to kind of focus on the scoring load because he's one of our best isolation scorers still next to Wemby. Even maybe overall, he might be our most controlled
Yeah.
isolation scorer that we have as of right now. Um, the main thing for me is consistency. And I think that just comes down to the circumstances and the context that I talked about earlier. It's not to just make excuses for that and pin everything on that. But I mean, that has an impact on his situation, the looks he gets, who he's playing with, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing I want to harp on is what you mentioned. I would like to see him increase his aggressiveness as well. Um, there's just some possessions where the ball needs to be in his hands more. He doesn't need, as much as I love Devin as a catch and shoot guy, because again, a 42% shooter from three on the season. Um, he's too dynamic to keep the ball out of his hands, especially when he's playing with the bench rotation.
I was going to say the same thing. When he's next to CP and Vic, I get it. Needs to move without the ball, pin down action, that sort of thing. But off the bench, he needs to have the ball in his hands, I would say 90% of the time. Like, I
Yeah,
love KJ. Start cutting to the basket, my guy. Set
yeah,
some picks. Pretty much everybody else. Let Devin cook. That should be his time to shine. And it feels like too often he's being conservative and letting the rest of the team, letting the game come to him when he needs to be um, like putting his mark on the game.
yeah. Absolutely. We saw the mark that Devin can leave on games with the Wemby pick and roll and
Yes.
the two-man game last season. And even this year, I mean, you've still seen some performances where he's just hitting insanely tough shots. So we
Mhm.
had somebody in our last live who was calling Devin, I'm trying, my tough shot merchant.
He is.
And he really is that. But we also want him to be, like you said, you don't want to always force yourself into that situation.
Look for the
It
easy shots.
yeah. It's a balance because he's got that in his bag, and that's one of the things that makes him the dynamic scorer and player that he is. Um, but also, like you said, you want to make sure that you go through all your progressions and all your reads, almost like a quarterback when you have the ball in your hand, uh, to make sure that you can get the best shot for yourself. Because
Mhm.
if he's having better looks, he's going to knock him down more with his skill level. But again, like you said, that the bigger thing for me is just putting that mark on the game, having an emphasis on having intensity every possession. And I think some of that also ties into the rest of the guys. We got to look to get him the ball more off the bench. We almost need to treat him like Wemby in a sense when he's running with the bench rotation. And when I say that, I just mean with the emphasis of getting him the ball. Yes, it's not to the same extent, but still with that bench rotation, there's nobody else that I would want taking the most shots other than Devin.
Agreed. And just for context for those listening, he's only played 9 of the 24 games, all of which have come off the bench with a minutes restriction of 24
Yes.
minutes. So this could all turn around once that minutes restriction is removed. Jude, he's getting 30 plus minutes a game as that
Right.
starting 2/3. Maybe everything clicks for him, but as of right now, I'm going to give him a B minus.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll roll with a B.
B's good.
But honestly, I could go with B minus too. The only reason I gave it a B is just because of the context. But with that being said, read one more comment here and then we'll wrap this up. Mace says, speaking of Dev, what's the outlook on injury management? Hope they don't sit guys out during the Portland game, mostly because I'm going to be there with the Sohan wig. Well, first of all, we love to hear that, my guy, especially if that is up in Portland. Shout out to you there,
Yeah.
repping with the Sohan wig for sure. Devin Vassell was not on the injury report, and I think with the 4-day break that we're going to get with the NBA Cup on Tuesday and Wednesday, I'd be very surprised unless something happens in practice. Like, I'd be very surprised if injury management wise, they're like, we're going to keep Devin out. I'm going to be pretty sure. I would feel like 99% certain that Devin's going to play on Friday.
I would echo that, but I understand where he's coming from in the sense that like we kind of need some of
Yeah.
these wins. Let's play these guys. If they're not actually injured, let's play and try and win.
Yeah. Definitely get where he's coming from for sure. But in this little NBA Cup, like mini 2-week break type thing, I think ideally everybody should play. There's no back to backs either.
Right. Shout out.
But we appreciate you guys hanging out with us tonight. We will be back next week to recap the 2 games that we have over the weekend, maybe even talk a little bit of NBA Cup. Just curious to see how those go. But we'll be back to recap the Timberwolves as well as the Portland game. And then we'll be back to preview the Hawks game next Thursday and whoever else we play next weekend. I don't remember exactly. But again, we appreciate you guys. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button below if you enjoyed the content. And if you want to stay updated with everything on the channel, be sure to follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. You can also turn on the notification bell to stay updated with the channel and check out our community tab for updates on postings or any last minute cancellations of streams and stuff like that. And even if you have some questions like Cowboy Tanaka did, we'll be sure in the next stream to mention them if you drop them there as well. So again, we appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all in the next one and we'll see y'all later.